The NEC first came into being in the early 90s, and the other thing that was major development in the early 90s in the construction industry was the advent of the Construction Act, all coming out of the Latham and Egan reports. I guess one of the questions that a lot of people ask is there a combination or a joint thinking between the way the Construction Act developed and the implementation of the NEC and the way that developed and was presented to the market? Ewan, what do you think?
Well, I think in the 1990s, the construction industry had gone through quite a confrontational period, and there was clearly a movement to go away from that, as addressed by Latham, and get things sorted out in a more proactive way. So I think the Construction Act helped in that respect, with respect to cash flow being the lifeblood of the industry and getting payment moving. And the NEC as a very proactive form of contract, addressing issues as they arose at the time to avoid disputes and problems in the future. So I think in that regard, yes, there is a common set of values that address confrontation and try and deal with things proactively at the time.
So I would say that they're common but different, because the Construction Act very much focuses on ensuring payment through the supply chain, where the NEC is much more focused on the project management mechanism to avoid there being a problem in the first place, so that you don't even think about there being a problem with actually allowing money to flow through the chain. John, do you think that's fair?
I think, yes, they came from different places, although the Construction Act came from Latham's review. Latham, the NEC was already published in existence and had a little bit of a track record. We're talking 2 hands worth of projects at that time being used by leading clients. And Latham looked at the NEC, looked at what people said about it, and basically said this seems to be a good thing. And I think he came up with 13 principles of best practice for a modern construction contract, of which the NEC had 10, 11, something like that, or was substantially more ahead of the other ones. And 2 of those were, it had adjudication already, and then there was the payment provisions. So there's a common heritage, but they come from a different place.
The industry's moved on a lot since the Latham and Egan report came out and NEC started its life, hasn't it, Ian?
Yeah, I think the industry in the UK has moved on since then, and certainly the use of the NEC has grown, and that reflects the market wanting to be more collaborative. I think seeing the benefits of working closer together. Adjudication has also had in part the desired effect in helping to resolve disputes earlier, improve cash flow down the supply chain, allowing subcontractors better access to some sort of recompense if there is a problem further up the supply chain. But it's still taking time, and there's still a way to go before it's fully embedded across all areas of our industry. And internationally, obviously, there's a lot of countries where they haven't been through that process, and it's still a very confrontational market and still very negative. Adjudication
is now quite different, I think, to how it was originally envisaged at the NEC stage when it was first developed by NEC and then brought into the Construction Act. Would you agree with that, John?
Yes, I would, because adjudication started off as a cheaper, simpler, less proceduralised form of dispute resolution compared with arbitration or litigation. And arbitration started off as a cheaper, simpler, less proceduralised form of dispute resolution compared with litigation. Someone said it was a good idea, Act of Parliament passed, attracted case law, got longer. Adjudication's going the same way, slowly inching that way, and I think that's due to the Act. So in terms of where it's getting away from what the original intention of the contract was, which was resolve a difference which you can't, but by bringing in an independent third party quickly and then move on, yes, it is getting away from that.
Ian, how does that sound to you?
Well, I completely agree with that, and that's absolutely right, that I think the statutory support for adjudication has made it much less useful. The original idea was, as John's described, an independent third party to be brought in to resolve a dispute, predominantly technical, a small single item, parties can't agree, let's get an independent opinion which will bind us under the contract, and we can always go to some sort of tribunal later to get it sorted out. And because of what's happened around the legal support for it, the fact that it becomes binding, the courts will enforce it, people want to sort of lawyer up, get their teams on board and drive in a certain direction. And now what we're seeing is people bringing in other forms of dispute resolution into contracts, even NEC contracts, early neutral evaluation, another way of getting a third party opinion which isn't which isn't sort of legally backed, but it's just a practical, independent third party. What's your view on this? What do you think the right answer is?
Stepping away from the adjudication part of the Construction Act, I think the other key difference was the payment provision. And again, a key difference with the NEC form of contract is the payment provision in the standard form starts with the project manager making an assessment rather than the contractor making an application. Do you think that helps or hinders the way the contract works, John?
I think in reality, all main contractors I know submit an application. So the practicalities of it doesn't make any difference. Legally?
Well, I just think from a practical point of view, it's probably a good thing that the project manager has the responsibility and onus to make that assessment. But if the contractor didn't provide that application for payment, which under the NEC the project manager should consider, the project manager is likely to come to a lesser valuation of the payment because the contractor is in possession of the records and he knows what costs he's got. So it's a provision in the contract which I take note of, but I don't think it really bites as much as perhaps people thought it might.
I think it varies depending on main options. Obviously under option A, activity schedule, I think it's a lot easier for the project manager to make an assessment without there being an application, because that should be based on factually what's completed in terms of activities. Option B, if there's a joint measurement team that's taking place with the employer's team and the contractor's team doing the remeasure, again, shouldn't be a hindrance. But under options C, D and E, where the payments are based on the contractor's defined cost, so their accounts and records, absolutely, I can see that being an issue where the project manager may not be able to assess or certify the right amount, and a contractor will certainly, I would have thought, want to apply for what they think is the right number.
So wrapping up the ideas that came out of that discussion, I guess the NEC and the Construction Act coming from a common background and common thread, they seem to be developed in quite different ways, some successful, some not so successful. But I think they're really both a reflection of the market, and I think every one of us can see bits in both the NEC and the Construction Act that we'd like to change, to modify and make work better. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.